lead us in a reading that will give us the background about Mr. Chapek, Norbert Chapek, who is the creator of the Flower Communion.
Flowers of Hope.
No, it's not on.
Flowers of Hope, the Chapek's Flower Communion. The Flower Communion was created by Unitarians Norbert and Maha Chapek in 1923 and introduced to the United States by Maha Chapek in the 1940s. It is an annual ceremony which Unitarian Universalists practice today all over the world. Norbert was the minister of the largest Unitarian congregation in the world in Prague prior to World War II. Chapek felt the need for some symbolic ritual that would bind people more closely together. He thought that the format had to be one that would not alienate those who had left other religious faiths. The traditional Christian communion service with bread and wine was unacceptable to members of his congregation because of their strong reaction against the Catholic faith. Nonetheless, he sensed the desire for a commensurate ritual among his congregants. So he turned to the native beauty of his countryside for elements of a communion which would be genuine to his congregation. The Flower Communion symbolizes the beauty of each individual, the strength and power of the bouquet of us all together, and the gifts of peace and hope we give to each other. According to Maha, her husband's motivation was to stress and bring about brotherhood. As a symbol, he used flowers because in the name of a flower, no wars were waged, as was the case with the cross or the chalice. In 1941, on Norbert's last Sunday in the Prague pulpit, he criticized Hitler, despite knowing that there were Nazis in the pews. Later, he was sent to Dachau, where he was killed in 1942 in a Nazi medical experiment. According to Nazi court documents, his egalitarian message proclaiming the dignity of all people was, quote, too dangerous to the Reich for him to be allowed to live. Sadly, Maha did not learn of his death until the end of the war.
Hello. The first time I heard the phrase flower communion, my thoughts immediately resonated with the image of a group of people who actually set aside a whole Sunday service just to commune with flowers. Well, since I've been communing with flowers since I was 3, it occurred to me I was probably definitely in the right place. Of course, as time went on, I realized the more profound significance of the flower communion ritual, but I was still very taken with it because, again, it's centered around flowers. When I first participated in this ritual back in 2013, I stood in a circle with all of the members of this congregation, each one holding a different flower. And it occurred to me that I knew the names of the flowers more than I knew the names of the people who were holding them. That too has changed with time, I'm happy to say. And in spite of not knowing a lot of you at that time, I still felt I was definitely in a company of like-minded people. I even remember Diana Beck. She brought a dandelion. And I thought that seemed very appropriate since Unitarian Universalists embrace diversity, even among flowers. Now, anyone who has had the privilege of visiting my garden, and anybody is welcome at any time because gardens are places you need to share, will become instantaneously aware that I'm very fond of diversity. The garden is, plants are composed of a variety of colors and shapes and sizes and varieties that create a virtual mosaic of color, especially at this time of year. And it's very effective because it's a panoramic spread, and yet there's a unifying principle. And that unifying principle is the beauty of the flowers themselves, especially as they join together to create a whole garden. And then I look around the congregation and I see a variety of people. All of you come from different backgrounds. All of you have very different ideas, very different ways of looking at things, varied approaches to your spirituality. And yet, rather than argue or be hostile to one another, we embrace those differences. We share those ideas. And in doing that, we create a human garden, a garden of humanity. Now, the thing about a garden is this: gardens don't just happen. Gardens are created, and gardens need care. They require vigilance to prevent them from being overtaken by weeds that can destroy the garden itself. A garden composed of people also needs care. It needs a lot of nurturing so that every member feels as though they are an integral part of the whole. That there would be a whole within the circle of this congregation should any one of you not be a part of it any longer. You would be missed. There'd be a sense of absence. Just as in my garden, if somebody were to come along one day and pull one of my plants out, I would notice immediately that there was something missing in my garden. And so we would miss any one of you because you are part of this garden. As I said, a human garden needs loving care. It needs attentiveness. It needs vigilance so that negativity and discontent cannot creep in and overwhelm it the way weeds can do in a garden. Every plant in my garden feels loved. A garden composed of humans also needs to feel loved to an even greater degree. Every member of the congregation is responsible for extending a sense of inclusiveness to every other member. There is a harmony in my garden, a kind of reciprocal continuity, a blending of the plants in a way that creates the gestalt of the garden itself. The garden's flowers support each other. Even when they aren't flowers that you would ordinarily think would go together, somehow or another they do combine and they do support one another. In the native tradition, we have what we call the three sisters, and that is the beans, the corn, and the squash. And we always plant them together because they help each other. The beans climb around the corn shades the squash, so you have a gestalt of plants that are effective in helping one another. And that's what this congregation is. It's a gestalt of humanity coming together to support each other and to love each other. So even though our ideas can stretch across the whole intellectual spectrum, sometimes seemingly to be the exact opposite of one another, and yet it's the sense of community that holds us together. in renewing our sense of community with this annual Flower Communion, let's renew our commitment to inclusiveness. But it should be an inclusiveness that will reach out well beyond this circle. It should extend into our daily connections and interactions with one another and with the greater community of which we are members. In that way, we will allow the world to understand why we call ourselves Unitarian Universalists, and members of an always open circle. So this then is the reason for this sacred ritual. It is a colorful metaphor for the continuing existence of a community that is a garden of humanity. Thank you.